The morning sun cast long shadows across the mining colony of Kepler 442b as Taman Park adjusted his scanning equipment near the eastern ridge. The air was thin but breathable, with a metallic taste that reminded him of old coins. Red dust covered everything on this planet, from the prefab buildings of the human settlement to the sleek vehicles the Vorthak used to transport their crystal harvests. Taman wiped sweat from his forehead and checked his readings again. As the colony's xenobiologist, he spent most days cataloging the strange creatures that lived in the lower valleys. Most were harmless. Small, six-legged creatures that looked like purple rabbits. Flying things with translucent wings that sang in harmonies. Even the larger predators seemed more interested in avoiding humans than attacking them. But today felt different. His equipment kept picking up strange signals from the northern mountains. The peaks rose like jagged teeth against the pale yellow sky, wrapped in perpetual mist that never seemed to clear. The Vorthak called those mountains the Forbidden Heights, and they never explained why. "Taman, you out there?" Mi-Young Kim's voice crackled through his comm unit. She was the head engineer, and one of the few people on the colony who understood his passion for studying alien life. "Yeah, I'm here. Getting some weird readings from the north again. Well, put that on hold for now. Elder Krethvar wants to see all department heads in the main hall. Sounds serious." Taman packed his equipment and headed back to the colony. The settlement was built in concentric circles around a central hub, with the human quarters on one side and the Vorthak dwellings on the other. The two species had worked together for 3 years now, mining the valuable energy crystals that powered half the galaxy's technology. It was a good partnership, even if the Vorthak sometimes seemed nervous about things the humans found perfectly normal. The main hall buzzed with quiet conversation as Taman entered. About 40 humans sat on one side of the room, while a dozen Vorthak stood on the other. The Vorthak were tall, lizard-like beings with smooth green scales and large, intelligent eyes. They wore simple robes and spoke in careful, precise sentences. Elder Krethvar stood at the front of the room. He was older than most Vorthak, with darker scales and elaborate markings that indicated his high status. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "My human friends, we must discuss a matter of great importance. The safety of this colony depends on your understanding." Dongwu Li, the colony administrator, shifted in his chair. "What's the concern, Elder?" Krethvar's large eyes swept across the room. "Some of you have been conducting surveys near the northern boundaries. This must stop immediately." Taman felt his heart skip. He had been the only one working near the northern ridge lately. "The northern peaks," Krethvar continued, "are home to the Shadowfang dragons. These creatures are not like the small animals you study in the valleys. They are apex predators of incredible intelligence and malevolence." A younger Vorthak named Zethkor stepped forward. "The dragons possess psychic abilities that can drive lesser minds to madness. Their very presence corrupts the thoughts of any being not strong enough to resist." "How big are they?" asked Hyojin Choi, a maintenance worker who had always been fascinated by the planet's wildlife. "The adults can grow to 30 meters in length," Krethvar replied. "Their scales are harder than battle armor, and their claws can slice through solid stone, but their physical abilities are nothing compared to their mental powers." Mi-Young raised her hand. "Have you actually seen these dragons recently, or are we talking about historical records?" The Vorthak exchanged glances. Zethkor answered, "Our ancestors encountered them 7 generations ago. Entire settlements were destroyed. Hundreds of Vorthak died or went insane from exposure to their psychic emanations." "But that was over 200 years ago," Mi-Young pointed out. "Maybe they've moved on, or maybe they've changed." Krethvar's tail lashed behind him, a sign of agitation among his people. "Dragons do not change. They are creatures of pure predatory instinct, enhanced by unnatural mental powers. They view all other life as either prey or competition to be eliminated." Taman couldn't help himself. "What do they eat? What's their reproduction cycle? Do they travel in groups or alone?" "These questions are irrelevant," Krethvar said sharply. "What matters is that they are absolutely dangerous to all sentient life. The northern peaks are forbidden territory. Any human who approaches those mountains puts not just themselves at risk, but the entire colony. Forbidden territory, Dongwu repeated. Got it. We'll mark it on all our survey maps and make sure everyone knows to stay away. Good. Krethvar seemed relieved. The dragons have remained in their mountain lairs for many years now. As long as we do not disturb them, they should continue to leave us alone. As the meeting broke up, Taemin found himself walking alongside Mi-young toward the engineering section. You don't look convinced, she said. Something doesn't add up. If these dragons are so dangerous, why haven't we detected any evidence of them? My scans should pick up large life forms, especially if they're as massive as Krethvar claims. Maybe your equipment can't detect them through all that mountain rock and mist. Maybe. Taemin frowned. Or maybe the Vorthak are scared of something that isn't as dangerous as they think. Taemin. Mi-young stopped walking and looked at him seriously. I know that look. That's your, I'm about to do something stupid in the name of science look. I'm not planning anything stupid. I'm just curious about the biosignatures I've been detecting. Biosignatures? Taemin pulled out his data pad and showed her the readings from that morning. Look at these patterns. They're too regular to be geological, but too complex to be simple animals. And they're definitely coming from the northern peaks. Mi-young studied the data. As an engineer, she understood sensor readings better than most. These do look like life signs, but they're strange. The energy patterns are unlike anything in our databases. Exactly. Which means we're dealing with a species that hasn't been properly studied. The Vorthak's information is 2 centuries old and based on traumatic encounters. That's not science, it's folklore. It's also a direct order from our partners not to investigate. Taemin was quiet for a long moment. What if there are injured animals up there? What if they need help? What if they're exactly as dangerous as the Vorthak say they are? Before Taemin could answer, his scanner started beeping urgently. He looked down at the display and felt his breath catch. The biosignatures from the northern peaks had changed. Instead of the steady rhythmic patterns he'd been tracking, the display now showed rapid, irregular spikes. Mi-young, look at this. She leaned over his shoulder. Those look like distress signals. Multiple sources all coming from the same area. Something's in trouble up there. The scanner continued to beep as the signals grew more frantic. Whatever was happening in the Forbidden Mountains, it was happening right now. We should report this to Dongwu, Mi-young said. But her voice lacked conviction. Taemin looked toward the northern peaks, barely visible through the colony's transparent dome. Somewhere up there, creatures were in distress. Maybe dangerous creatures, maybe creatures that would kill him on sight. But they were still living beings, and they needed help. The signals on his scanner grew even more urgent. Yeah, he said, quietly. We should definitely report this. But even as he said it, Taemin was already planning his route to the northern mountains. The distress signals grew stronger as night fell over the colony. Taemin sat in his small quarters staring at his scanner display. The irregular spikes had been going on for hours now, and they were definitely coming from living creatures. Something was wrong in the northern mountains, and no one else seemed to care. He tried to sleep, but every few minutes the scanner would beep again. Finally, at 3 in the morning, he gave up and got dressed. If he was going to investigate, he needed help from people he trusted. His first stop was Jinho Nam's quarters. Jinho was a rescue specialist who had joined the colony 6 months ago, after working disaster relief on 3 different worlds. If anyone would understand the urgency of a distress call, it would be him. Taemin knocked softly on the door. After a moment, Jinho appeared, looking alert despite the early hour. He was a compact man with quick eyes and steady hands, the kind of person you wanted around in an emergency. Taemin, what's wrong? I need to show you something. Taemin held out his scanner. These are distress signals from the northern peaks. They've been going on for hours. Jinho studied the display. His expression grew serious as he recognized the patterns. These are panic signals. Whatever's making them is in real trouble. The Vorthak say those mountains are forbidden. They claim there are dangerous dragons up there. Do you believe them? Taman hesitated. I think they're scared of something they don't understand, but scared or not, if something's in distress, we have a responsibility to help. Jinho was quiet for a moment. How many people are we talking about taking? Small team, you, me, maybe. Mi Young for technical support, and Yejin from communications in case we need to call for help. Yejin Seo? She'll never agree to break colony rules. She might if she hears these signals herself. 20 minutes later, the four of them sat in the communication center. Yejin had rigged her equipment to amplify the distress signals, and now they could hear them clearly through the speakers. The sounds were haunting, almost musical calls that rose and fell in patterns that seemed too complex to be random. That's not just animal noise, Mi Young said. There's structure to it, intelligence. Yejin nodded. The patterns repeat, but with variations, it's almost like language. Jinho checked his rescue equipment. How far into the forbidden zone would we need to go? Taman consulted his scanner. About 15 kilometers past the boundary markers. The signals are coming from a valley between two of the highest peaks. That's a full day's hike, Mi Young pointed out. We'd need to camp overnight. Are we really doing this? Yejin asked. Dongwu will have our heads if he finds out. Only if we get caught, Taman said. We take basic supplies, move fast, and we're back before anyone notices we're gone. The pre-dawn air was cold as they loaded their equipment into a small survey vehicle. Taman brought his biological scanners. Jinho packed rescue gear and medical supplies. Mi Young carried portable power sources and repair tools, and Yejin brought communication equipment and emergency beacons. The drive to the boundary took 2 hours across rough terrain. The northern mountains loomed ahead of them, wrapped in the perpetual mist that made them so mysterious. As they got closer, Taman noticed that his scanner readings were becoming clearer and more detailed. Stop here, he said when they reached the Vorthak warning markers. From here we go on foot. The mist was thicker than it looked from a distance. It swirled around them as they climbed, limiting visibility to just a few meters. The distress signals grew stronger with each step, and now they could hear them faintly through the air without the scanner. There, Jinho pointed ahead. I can see something. A dark opening in the mountainside became visible through the mist. It was the entrance to a cave system, and the distress calls were definitely coming from inside. The signals are strongest just past that entrance, Taman said, checking his scanner. They approached carefully. The cave mouth was partially blocked by fallen rocks, as if there had been a landslide recently. The distress calls were much clearer now, and they could hear multiple voices calling to each other. Hello? Jinho called into the cave. Is anyone in there who needs help? The calls stopped immediately. Then, after a moment of silence, they started again, but different this time. More urgent, and directed toward the cave entrance. They know. We're here, Mi Young said. Taman activated his scanner's light function and peered into the cave. I'm reading 3 distinct life forms about 20 meters inside. They're trapped behind a rockfall. How big are they? Yejin asked nervously. Taman studied his display. Smaller than I expected, maybe 2 meters long each. Definitely not. The 30-meter monsters the Vorthak described. Jinho was already unpacking his rescue equipment. If they're trapped, we need to move those rocks. Mi Young, can your tools help? I've got plasma cutters and lifting equipment. Give me 10 minutes to set up. As Mi Young prepared her tools, the calls from inside the cave changed again. Now they sounded almost excited, as if the trapped creatures understood that help was coming. Taman, Yejin said quietly, look at your scanner. The life form readings are changing. He looked down at his display and felt his breath catch. The 3 trapped creatures were showing energy patterns he had never seen before. Their biosignatures were shifting and flowing like liquid light, with complex harmonics that suggested incredible neurological activity. They're not just intelligent, he whispered. They're doing something with their brains that my equipment can barely detect. The plasma cutter hummed to life as Mi Young began cutting through the smaller rocks. Within minutes, they had cleared. a passage large enough for the trapped creatures to escape. But instead of fleeing, 3 young dragons emerged slowly from the cave. They were beautiful, about the size of large dogs, with scales that shimmered between deep blue and silver. Their eyes were large and bright, filled with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. Instead of the terrifying monsters described by the Vorthak, these creatures looked curious and grateful. The largest of the 3 approached Taman directly. It made a soft chirping sound and touched his hand gently with its snout. The contact sent a warm sensation up his arm, and suddenly his mind was filled with images. He saw the landslide from the dragon's perspective, the terror of being trapped, the desperate calls for help that went unanswered for hours, and then the joy and amazement when strange 2-legged creatures appeared and began clearing away the rocks. "They're trying to communicate," he said in wonder. "I can see what happened." To them, the other 2 dragons approached Jin Ho and Mi Young, making the same gentle contact. Each human experienced the same rush of shared images and emotions. "This is incredible," Mi Young breathed. "They're telepathic, but it's not hostile. It's like they're sharing their memories with us." Ye Jin kept her distance, but she was recording everything with her communication equipment. "Are they dangerous?" The dragons seemed to understand her fear. The smallest one, with scales that showed hints of purple in the light, approached her, slowly, and made soft, reassuring sounds. When she didn't back away, it gently touched her ankle. Yijin's expression changed from fear to wonder. "They're thanking us. I can feel their gratitude." But then something unexpected happened. When the humans turned to leave, the dragons followed them. When Timon tried to shoo them back toward their cave, they refused to go. "I think they want to stay with us," Jinho said. The largest dragon, the one that had first approached Timon, rubbed against his leg like an enormous cat. Through their telepathic connection, he could sense its desire to stay close to these strange, kind creatures who had saved its life. "We can't take them back to the colony," Mi Young said. "The Vorthak would panic." But even as she spoke, the dragons were making it clear that they had no intention of being left behind. They clustered around the 4 humans, chirping and sharing comforting telepathic images. Taman's scanner suddenly started beeping again, but this time with a different tone. He looked at the display and felt his heart start racing. "We have a problem," he said. "I'm reading multiple large life forms approaching from the higher peaks. Really large life forms." Through the mist, they could hear deep, resonant calls echoing off the mountainsides. The hatchlings immediately became alert, calling back to the approaching sounds. "The parents," Yejin whispered. The adult dragon calls grew closer, and they didn't sound happy. The hatchlings pressed closer to their human rescuers as if seeking protection. "What do we do?" Mi Young asked. Before anyone could answer, 3 enormous shadows began to take shape in the mist above them. The adult dragons had arrived. The adult dragons descended through the mist like living mountains. Taman had never seen anything so magnificent or terrifying in his life. The largest was easily 25 meters long, with scales that shifted from deep black to brilliant silver as it moved. Its eyes were the size of dinner plates, ancient and intelligent, studying the humans with an intensity that made Taman's skin crawl. "Nobody move," Jinho whispered. "Don't do anything that might seem threatening." The 3 hatchlings immediately ran toward the adults, chirping excitedly. But instead of fleeing to safety, they kept looking back at the humans, making the same telepathic contact gestures they had used earlier. The largest adult dragon, obviously the leader, landed with a ground-shaking thud just 10 meters away. Up close, Taman could see the incredible detail of its scales, each one perfectly formed and gleaming with an inner light. This was no mindless predator. This was a being of obvious intelligence and power. For long moments, dragon and humans stared at each other. The tension was so thick Taemin could barely breathe. One wrong move and they would all be dead in seconds. Then something unexpected happened. The smallest hatchling, the purple-scaled one that had bonded with Yejin, approached the massive adult and began making rapid telepathic contact. The adult's expression changed from suspicious to curious as it received whatever message the hatchling was sharing. I think it's telling the adult what happened, Ye-Jin whispered. About the cave-in and how we helped. The leader dragon's great head swung back toward the humans. This time, when it looked at them, there was less suspicion and more curiosity. It took a careful step forward, moving with surprising grace for something so large. Taemin felt his legs shaking, but he forced himself to stand still. The dragon lowered its massive head until it was level with his own. He could feel its breath, warm and strangely sweet-smelling, washing over him. Then very gently the dragon touched its snout to Taemin's forehead. The telepathic contact hit him like a wave. But instead of the simple images he had received from the hatchlings, this was a flood of complex thoughts and emotions. He saw glimpses of dragon society, vast cities carved into mountainsides, generations of dragons living in harmony with their environment. He felt their deep connection to the planet, their role as guardians of the ancient places. Most importantly, he felt their confusion and sadness about the long conflict with the Vorthak. The dragons had tried many times to communicate, to explain, that they only wanted to protect their sacred sites. But every attempt at contact had ended in violence and misunderstanding. When the contact ended, Taemin staggered backward. The dragon leader watched him with something that might have been hope in its massive eyes. "What did you see?" Mi-young asked urgently. "They're not predators," Taemin said, his voice shaking. "They're guardians, and they've been trying to communicate with the Vorthak for centuries." The other two adult dragons had landed nearby. They were smaller than the leader, but still impressive, with scales that ranged from deep green to golden bronze. One of them approached Mi-young, while the third moved toward Jin-ho. Each human experienced the same overwhelming telepathic contact. Each received the same flood of dragon history and emotion, and each came away with the same stunning realization. "The Vorthak have been wrong about everything," Mi-young said in amazement. The hatchlings seemed pleased with these developments. They moved freely between humans and adults, sharing excitement and contentment through their telepathic abilities. The purple-scaled hatchling had claimed Ye-Jin as its special friend, while a golden-scaled one had bonded with Mi-young. The silver-blue hatchling stayed close to Taemin, radiating happiness and trust. "We need to get back to the colony," Jin-ho said. "People need to know about this." But as they prepared to leave, the hatchlings made it clear they intended to come along. The adults seemed torn between allowing this and protecting their young from potential danger. The leader dragon approached Taemin again, this time sharing more specific images. He saw the dragon's understanding of human technology, their curiosity about these strange creatures who showed no fear scent like the Vorthak did. He felt their desperate hope that maybe, finally, they had found someone who could bridge the gap between species. "They want us to take the hatchlings back with us," Taemin realized, "as ambassadors, to prove that dragons and humans can coexist." "That's crazy," Ye-Jin said. "The Vorthak will panic if we show up with dragon hatchlings." The silver-blue hatchling touched her arm gently, sharing images of peace and friendship. Despite her fears, Ye-Jin found herself smiling at the young dragon's obvious affection. "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen," she said quietly. The journey back to the colony took twice as long with the hatchlings accompanying them. The young dragons were endlessly curious about human equipment, and they had to stop frequently to prevent them from accidentally damaging something important. But Taemin was amazed by how quickly the hatchlings learned. When Mi-young showed her golden-scaled companion how to operate a scanner, it understood immediately. When Jin-ho demonstrated basic first-aid techniques, his bronze-scaled friend memorized every step. "They're incredibly intelligent," he marveled. "Probably smarter than we are." As they crested the final hill before the colony, Taemin's communication unit crackled to life. "Taemin, this is Dongwu. Where are you? The Vorthak are asking questions about your research team and I can't find any of you anywhere." Taemin looked at the three hatchlings walking alongside his team, their scales shimmering in the afternoon sun. There was no way to hide what they had done. "We're coming in now," he said into the communicator, "and we're bringing guests." "Guests? What kind of guests?" Taemin looked at the hatchlings again. The silver-blue one looked back at him with trust and affection in its large eyes. the kind that are going to change everything. As they approached the colony perimeter, alarms began to sound. Timon could see Vorthak warriors rushing toward defensive positions, their weapons ready. The hatchlings moved closer to their human companions, seeking reassurance. "It's going to be okay," Timon told them, hoping he was right. Through the colony's transparent dome, he could see crowds gathering to stare at the approaching group. Some pointed in fear, others in amazement. The Vorthak were clearly agitated, their tail lashing and rapid movements indicating high stress. Elder Krethvar himself appeared at the main gate, flanked by guards. When he saw the dragon hatchlings, his large eyes widened in horror. "What have you done?" he shouted across the distance. "You have doomed us all." The hatchlings pressed even closer to the humans, frightened by the hostile reception. Taemin placed a protective hand on his silver-blue companion's head. "We've made first contact," he called back, "and we've learned the truth about dragons." But as they reached the colony gates, Taemin realized that convincing the Vorthak would be much harder than communicating with dragons. The fear and prejudice, built up over centuries, wouldn't disappear overnight. The real challenge was just beginning. The emergency meeting lasted 6 hours, and every minute felt like torture to Taemin. He sat in the colony's main conference room while the hatchlings waited in a secure holding area nearby, confused and frightened by their separation from their human companions. Elder Krethvar paced back and forth at the front of the room, his agitation obvious to everyone present. Several other Vorthak elders had been called in from distant settlements, and they all shared the same expression of barely controlled panic. "You have violated every safety protocol," Dongwu said for the third time. "Unauthorized expedition, contact with dangerous wildlife, bringing unknown creatures into the colony. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "We've made first contact with an intelligent species," Taemin replied calmly. "These aren't mindless predators. They're highly advanced beings who've been trying to communicate for centuries." "Lies." Zethkor slammed his hand on the table. "The dragons are killers. Our ancestors recorded their attacks in detail. Entire settlements burned. Hundreds of our people driven insane by their psychic assaults." Mi Young leaned forward. "What if your ancestors misunderstood what they were seeing? What if the dragons were trying to protect something, not attack randomly?" "You speak of things you do not understand," Elder Krethvar said coldly. "The dragons corrupted the minds of our people. They turned families against each other. They made children attack their own parents." "That was 200 years ago," Jinho pointed out. "Maybe something has changed." Ye Jin activated her recording equipment. "Listen to this. These are the communications we recorded from the hatchlings." The melodic dragon calls filled the room. Even through the speakers, their complexity and intelligence were obvious. Several of the humans looked amazed, but the Vorthak only became more agitated. "Psychic manipulation," Krethvar declared. "They are already working to corrupt your minds." At that moment, the door burst open. Sung Ho Yoon, the colony's medic, rushed in looking panicked. "One of the hatchlings is sick," he announced. "The silver-blue one collapsed about an hour ago. It's not responding to anything." Taemin was on his feet immediately. "Let me see it." "Absolutely not," Dongwu said firmly. "You've caused enough trouble already." "It bonded with me telepathically," Taemin insisted. "I might be the only one who can help." Before anyone could stop him, he pushed past the guards and ran toward the holding area. Behind him, he could hear Dongwu shouting orders and the Vorthak arguing loudly among themselves. The holding area was a large storage bay that had been hastily converted. The 3 hatchlings had been separated from each other, each placed in its own transparent enclosure. The silver-blue one lay motionless on the floor, its normally bright scales dull and lifeless. Taemin pressed his hands against the enclosure. "Let me in there." "I can't do that," the guard said nervously. "Direct orders from administration." The hatchling's breathing was labored and shallow. Its large eyes were closed, and it showed no response to external stimuli. The other 2 hatchlings were calling to it frantically, their distress obvious even without telepathic contact. "It's dying," Taemin said urgently. "These creatures need social contact to survive. Separating them is killing them." Sung-ho arrived with a medical scanner. I've never seen anything like this. Its neural activity is dropping rapidly, but I can't find any physical cause. Because it's not physical, Tae-min realized. It's psychological, they're social creatures. Being separated from their companions and from us is causing them to shut down. More people arrived, including Mi-young, Jin-ho, and Ye-jin. They had apparently argued their way past the guards. When they saw the condition of the hatchlings, their expressions turned to horror. We have to do something, Mi-young said. They saved our lives by trusting us. We can't let them die in cages. Elder Krethvar entered the holding area with several guards. When he saw the dying hatchling, his expression hardened. This proves our point, he declared. The creatures are unstable. They should be removed from the colony immediately. They're not unstable, Tae-min said angrily. They're suffering because we're treating them like prisoners instead of guests. They are dragons, Zethkor said. They will grow into monsters that will destroy everything we have built here. The silver-blue hatchling's breathing became even more labored. Its scales were now completely dull, and its telepathic abilities seemed to have shut down entirely. Please, Tae-min begged. Just let me try to help it. If I'm wrong, you can do whatever you want with all of us. Dongwoo looked torn. As colony administrator, he had to balance the needs of all residents, human and Vorthak alike. But he was also watching a young, intelligent creature dying in front of him. 5 minutes, he said finally, but under heavy guard. The enclosure door opened, and Tae-min rushed inside. He knelt beside the hatchling and gently placed his hands on its head. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, very faintly, he felt the familiar warm sensation of telepathic contact. The hatchling's mind was filled with confusion and fear. It didn't understand why it had been separated from its companions and from the kind humans who had saved its life. It thought it had done something wrong, and the guilt was literally killing it. Through their connection, Tae-min sent feelings of love, acceptance, and reassurance. He showed the hatchling memories of their first meeting, the joy of rescue, the wonder of telepathic communication. Slowly, very slowly, the young dragon's neural activity began to stabilize. Its vital signs are improving, Sung-ho announced, watching his scanner in amazement. The other 2 hatchlings were calling excitedly from their enclosures. The golden-scaled one was pressing against its barrier, trying to reach Mi-young. The purple-scaled one was doing the same with Ye-jin. They need to be together, Tae-min said, and they need to be with us. That's how their species works. They form emotional bonds that are essential for their psychological health. Absolutely not, Krethvar said firmly. The risk is too great. But at that moment, alarms began blaring throughout the colony. The emergency communication system crackled to life. All personnel to emergency stations. We have multiple large contacts approaching from the northern peaks. Repeat, multiple large contacts approaching. Through the holding area's windows, they could see the adult dragons descending toward the colony. There were more than the 3 they had met earlier. Much more. The sky was filling with massive winged forms, their scales glinting in the afternoon sun. They've come for their young, Tae-min realized. The silver-blue hatchling struggled to its feet and pressed against the enclosure wall, calling to its approaching family. The sound was weak, but determined. This is what you have brought upon us, Krethvar said, his voice shaking with fear and anger. The dragon host comes to destroy the colony, but Tae-min could feel what the hatchling was feeling through their telepathic bond. The approaching dragons weren't coming to attack. They were coming to negotiate. They wanted their young back, but they also wanted something else. Something the hatchlings had told them about during their brief contact with humans. They wanted peace. They're not here to fight, Tae-min said urgently. They're here to talk. Dragons do not talk, Zethkor declared. They kill. Outside, the adult dragons were landing around the colony perimeter. Their calls echoed across the settlement, deep and resonant. The hatchlings called back, their voices carrying messages of safety and hope. Dongwoo's face was pale as he watched the displays showing dozens of dragons surrounding their home. We're outnumbered 50 to 1. Then we better hope Tae-min is right about them wanting to talk. Mi Young said grimly. The largest dragon, the one that had first contacted Tai Min, landed directly in front of the main gate. Through the colonies, external speakers, its voice boomed across the settlement. The sound was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. It wasn't just a roar or a call. It was structured, complex, clearly intelligent communication. "It's trying to talk to us," Yejin whispered in amazement. Elder Krethvar looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. Human and Vorthak alike, they were all waiting to see what he would decide. The fate of the colony and possibly the future of interspecies relations hung in the balance. The negotiations took place in the colony's main courtyard, under the open sky where the dragons could see their young were safe. Tai Min stood between two worlds, literally and figuratively, as he translated telepathic dragon communications into words the Vorthak could understand. The lead dragon, who had shared its name as Starweaver's Song of Ancient Skies, was magnificent up close. Its scales reflected the afternoon light like liquid metal, and its eyes held the wisdom of centuries. When it spoke through telepathic images, Tai Min felt like he was receiving messages from the planet itself. "They're not just here for the hatchlings," he told the assembled crowd. "They're here because of what happened today. For the first time in 200 years, someone listened to them without fear." Elder Krethvar remained skeptical. He stood with a group of Vorthak warriors, all armed and ready for battle. Ask them why their ancestors attacked our settlements. Tai Min relayed the question telepathically. The response came as a flood of images so complex it took several minutes for him to process them all. "They say your ancestors were mining in sacred places," he said finally. "The dragons tried to warn them away, but the Vorthak couldn't understand their communication. When the warnings were ignored, they tried to physically move the miners. The Vorthak interpreted this as attacks. Lies," Zethkor hissed. "Our people were slaughtered." The dragon shared more images, these ones filled with sadness and regret. Tai Min saw the conflict from the dragon perspective: confusion, frustration, and grief as communication attempts failed over and over again. "They're sorry about the deaths," Tai Min said quietly. "They never meant to hurt anyone. They were trying to protect places that were sacred to them, but they didn't know how to explain that to your people." "Sacred places," Dongwu repeated. "You mean the mining sites?" More telepathic images flooded Tai Min's mind. He saw vast underground chambers carved with dragon script, ancient burial sites where dragon ancestors rested, spawning pools where new generations were born. The northern mountains aren't just their territory, he realized. They're their cultural heartland. Everything important to dragon civilization is up there. Hyunwoo Baek, the colony's lead pilot, had been monitoring long-range sensors during the negotiations. Now he approached with a worried expression. "We have a bigger problem," he announced. "I'm reading massive movement in space. Ships, hundreds of them, approaching the system." "Vorthak reinforcements?" Dongwu asked hopefully. "No, sir, the energy signatures don't match any known technology. They're too big to be ships anyway. More like living creatures." Starweaver's song suddenly became agitated, sharing urgent, telepathic messages with the other adult dragons. Their calls grew louder and more complex, echoing across the mountain valleys. "What's happening?" Mi Young asked. Tai Min closed his eyes and opened his mind fully to the dragon leader's communication. What he received made his breath catch in his throat. "It's the Great Migration," he said in wonder. "Dragons from all over the galaxy are coming here. This planet is their ancestral home, and every 30 years they return to spawn and renew their cultural connections." "How many dragons are we talking about?" Dongwu asked nervously. The telepathic images showed space filled with massive dragon forms, their scales glinting in starlight as they traveled between worlds. Thousands upon thousands of them, all converging on Kepler 442b. "All of them," Tai Min whispered. "Every dragon in known space is coming here." The Vorthak were beginning to panic. Even their warriors looked nervous as the reality of the situation sank in. They were about to be vastly outnumbered by creatures they considered their ancestral enemies. "This is why they're so desperate to make peace," Tai Min continued. still processing the dragon communications. The migration can't proceed safely while there's conflict on the planet. If the dragons feel threatened, they might have to find a new spawning world. Good, Krethvar said harshly. Let them go elsewhere. But Starweaver's song shared new images, these ones showing the consequences of interrupting the migration. Dragons were dying throughout the galaxy, their birth rates falling, their ancient culture slowly fading. This planet was their only hope for species survival. If they can't complete the migration here, they'll go extinct within a few generations, Taman said urgently. We're not just talking about ending a conflict, we're talking about the survival of an entire species. Nayun Song, the colony's communications engineer, had been working to establish broader contact with the approaching dragons. Now her equipment was picking up transmissions from space. I'm getting coherent signals from the incoming migration, she announced. Multiple languages, but there are patterns I can isolate. The first wave of space-traveling dragons began entering the planet's atmosphere. They were even larger than the mountain-dwelling dragons, their forms adapted for life, in the void between stars. As they descended, their calls joined the chorus already echoing across the landscape. They're beautiful, Yejin breathed, watching the graceful giants settle onto distant peaks. The hatchlings were beside themselves with excitement. They called to the arriving dragons, sharing rapid-fire telepathic messages about their human friends and the amazing events of the past day. The young ones are telling everyone what happened, Taman realized. About the rescue, about human kindness, about the possibility of peace. More dragons were arriving every hour. The sky was filled with their massive forms, and their calls created a symphony that could be heard across the entire continent. Some landed in the distant mountains, others settled in the valleys, but all of them were focused on the small colony where first contact had been made. We're at the center of something huge, Mi Young said in amazement. This could change the entire galaxy. But with opportunity came danger. Elder Krethvar was becoming more agitated as the dragon numbers grew. Several Vorthak settlements had reported their entire populations fleeing southward, terrified by the massive migration passing overhead. My people will not tolerate this, he declared. If the colony continues to harbor dragons, the Vorthak Confederation will be forced to take action. What kind of action? Dongwu asked warily. Whatever is necessary to protect Vorthak lives and interests. The threat was clear. If the humans didn't abandon their dragon allies, they would lose their partnership with the Vorthak. Without Vorthak support, the colony couldn't survive. They would be stranded on an alien world with no way to obtain essential supplies or evacuation if needed. You're asking us to choose between genocide and our own survival, Taman said angrily. I'm asking you to choose between fantasy and reality, Krethvar replied. The dragons cannot be trusted no matter how convincing their current behavior appears. That night, as thousands of dragons settled across the northern continent, Taman sat with the three hatchlings in what had become an informal embassy area. The young dragons were happier than he had ever seen them, surrounded by the sounds and telepathic communications of their extended family. His silver-blue companion, who he had started calling Starweaver after its telepathic parent, shared images of the migration's significance. This wasn't just a biological necessity. It was a cultural celebration, a time when dragon wisdom and art from across the galaxy were shared and preserved. They have universities up there, he told Mi Young, who had joined him to sit with her own golden-scaled friend. Libraries of knowledge that go back millions of years, scientific discoveries we can't even imagine. And Krethvar wants us to help destroy all of that. Jinho approached with his bronze-scaled companion close behind. The young dragon had been teaching the rescue specialist about dragon first aid techniques, sharing knowledge through telepathic demonstration. Yunbi Park arrived on the evening transport, he announced. Your sister wants to meet the dragons. Taman's sister was a xenopsychologist who specialized in interspecies communication. If anyone could help bridge the gap between dragons and Vorthak, it would be her. There might still be hope, he said, looking up at the star-filled sky where more dragon forms were still arriving. If we can find the right way to communicate, maybe we can make everyone understand. But time was running out. The migration would only last a few weeks, and the Vorthak were growing more hostile by the hour. Soon, everyone would have to choose sides in a conflict that could determine the fate of multiple species. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance, and a small human colony found itself at the center of it all. The sabotage began just before dawn on the 5th day of the migration. Explosions echoed across the northern peaks as Vorthak extremists attempted to destroy the ancient dragon spawning pools. Taman woke to the sound of his hatchling companions, distressed calls and emergency alarms blaring throughout the colony. Multiple detonations in sectors 7 through 12, Neon announced over the communication system. The sacred sites are under attack. Through his telepathic bond with Starweaver, Taman felt the collective anguish of thousands of dragons as their most holy places were damaged. The young dragon's pain was so intense, it brought tears to his eyes. "Who's doing this?" he demanded, rushing toward the command center. Dongwu was coordinating emergency responses while monitoring dragon movements on the tactical display. A faction of Vorthak hardliners led by Zethkor. They slipped out during the night shift and planted explosives throughout the spawning grounds. Are they trying to start a war? "I think they're trying to force the dragons to attack the colony," Mi-young said grimly. "If dragons retaliate against humans, it proves their point about them being dangerous." Outside, the sky was filling with agitated dragons. Their calls had changed from the peaceful songs of the migration to harsh cries of anger and grief. Some of the largest space-traveling dragons were beginning to descend toward the colony, their intent unclear but their mood obviously hostile. "We need to stop this before it escalates," Jinho said. He was already suiting up in emergency gear. "If those dragons decide we're responsible for the attacks, they'll wipe out the colony in minutes." J1. Oh, the security chief, burst into the command center with news that made everything worse. Zethkor's group has taken Vorthak civilians hostage in the eastern settlement. They're demanding that all humans leave the planet within 24 hours. "They've lost their minds," Dongwu said in disbelief. "This will destroy everything we've built here." Through the telepathic link, Taman could sense Starweaver's adult parent approaching the colony at tremendous speed. The ancient dragon was furious about the attacks on the spawning grounds, but it was also concerned about the safety of its offspring and the humans who had shown them kindness. "I need to get up there," Taman said urgently. "The dragon elders need to understand that we're not responsible for the attacks." "Too dangerous," J1 replied. "The sky is full of angry dragons right now." But Starweaver was already moving toward the colony's exit, calling for Taman to follow. The young dragon's telepathic messages were clear. Its parent needed to speak with the human who had first made peaceful contact. "I'm going," Taman declared. "Starweaver can get me to the Dragon Council safely." "I'm coming with you," Mi-young announced. Her golden-scaled companion was making similar urgent gestures. "Stormcaller says they need multiple human voices." Yuri Cho, the cultural liaison who had been working on Dragon Vorthak communication protocols, joined them with her purple-scaled partner. "Nightsong thinks I might be able to help translate during the negotiations." The flight to the Dragon Council site was the most terrifying and exhilarating experience of Taemin's life. Starweaver had grown large enough to carry him, and soaring through the sky surrounded by hundreds of massive adult dragons was like being inside a living storm. The council was taking place on a high plateau, where the oldest dragons had gathered. These were beings of incredible age and wisdom, their scales bearing the scars of centuries and their eyes holding memories that spanned multiple galactic civilizations. Starweaver's song of ancient skies landed among them and immediately began, sharing telepathic communications about the human rescuers. The other council members listened with interest, their massive heads turning to study the three small humans with obvious curiosity. "They want to know why our species would risk everything to save young dragons," Taman translated as the telepathic images flooded his mind. "Because it was the right thing to do," Mi-young said simply. The ancient dragons found this concept fascinating. Through their shared consciousness, Taemin could sense their amazement at the idea of a species that would help others without expecting anything in return. But their wonder turned to anger when they learned about the attacks on the spawning grounds. Several of the largest dragons roared their fury, and for a moment Taemin thought they might decide to destroy the colony after all. Wait, he said urgently, opening his mind fully to their telepathic network. The attacks weren't ordered by the human government or the moderate Vorthak. They were done by extremists who want to prevent peace. He shared his memories of the past week, the rescue, the first contact, the growing understanding between species, and the fear that had driven some Vorthak to desperate measures. They're trying to trick you into attacking, Yuri added, her thoughts flowing through Nightsong into the dragon network. If you destroy the colony, it proves their point about dragons being dangerous. The dragon elders considered this information carefully. Finally, the oldest among them, a creature whose scales had turned nearly white with age, shared its decision with the council. They want to offer an alternative, Taemin realized. Instead of attacking the colony, they're going to help us stop the extremist. The rescue operation was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Humans, moderate Vorthak and dragons worked together to surround Zethkor's position in the eastern settlement. The extremists had barricaded themselves in the mining complex with their hostages, threatening to destroy the entire facility if their demands weren't met. But they hadn't counted on dragon intelligence gathering. The great creatures could sense the location and emotional state of every person in the complex through subtle telepathic scanning. They guided the rescue teams to safe entry points while avoiding areas where hostages might be endangered. Elder Krethvar himself joined the rescue effort, horrified by what his own people had done. "This is not the Vorthak way," he declared as they prepared to enter the complex. "We are not terrorists." The rescue itself was swift and precise. Dragons provided aerial support while human and Vorthak teams coordinated ground operations. When cornered, Zethkor's group surrendered rather than risk harming their own people further. But the real breakthrough came during the aftermath. As they treated the rescued hostages, Yunbi Park made a crucial discovery about Vorthak physiology. "Their fear response is neurochemical," she explained excitedly. "When Vorthak encounter dragons, their brains produce a compound that triggers panic reactions. It's not psychological, it's biological." "Can it be treated?" Krethvar asked hopefully. "With the right medication, yes. And I think the dragons might be able to help us develop it." The dragons were indeed eager to help solve the communication problem that had caused centuries of conflict. Their biotechnology was far advanced beyond anything humans or Vorthak had developed, and they quickly produced a neural modifier that allowed Vorthak to interact with dragons without the overwhelming fear response. The first test subject was Elder Krethvar himself. After taking the medication, he approached Starweaver's Song of Ancient Skies with curiosity rather than terror. When the great dragon gently touched his forehead with its snout, Krethvar experienced his first telepathic contact. "They are magnificent," he whispered, tears streaming down his scaled cheeks. Through the telepathic link, he experienced the same flood of dragon history and culture that the humans had received. But more importantly, he felt the dragon's genuine desire for peace and understanding. "We have been so wrong," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "For centuries we have been so wrong." The breakthrough led to rapid changes throughout the system. Other Vorthak settlements began requesting the neural modifier treatment, eager to experience true communication with their ancient neighbors. The dragons, delighted to finally be understood, shared knowledge and technology that revolutionized life on Kepler 442b. The mining operations were completely restructured. Instead of blindly digging into the planet's crust, the three species worked together to identify safe extraction sites that wouldn't damage dragon sacred places. The dragons' geological knowledge, accumulated over millions of years, allowed them to locate crystal deposits that were far richer than anything the Vorthak had found on their own. "Our mining efficiency has increased by 300%, Dongwu reported during the first Tri-Species Council meeting. "And we're extracting better quality crystals while causing minimal environmental damage." The hatchlings had grown considerably during the migration, but they remained close to their human companions. Starweaver now stood nearly 3 meters tall, its silver-blue scales more brilliant than ever. It had become the unofficial ambassador between young dragons and the colony's children, teaching human kids to communicate telepathically while learning about human games and customs. They're not just learning our language, Taemin observed as he watched children and hatchlings playing together in the colony's new integrated recreation area. They're creating a new form of communication that combines telepathic images with spoken words. Mi Young's golden companion, Stormcaller, had become fascinated with human engineering and was working with the technical teams to develop hybrid technologies. Dragon biotechnology combined with human manufacturing produced devices that were both more efficient and more environmentally friendly than anything either species had created alone. "Look at this," Mi Young said, showing Taemin a new crystal processing unit. "Stormcaller helped us design organic components that repair themselves. This machine could run for centuries without maintenance." The Vorthak were equally amazed by dragon knowledge. Elder Krethavar had become the leading advocate for interspecies cooperation, sharing dragon agricultural techniques that could feed Vorthak colonies throughout the galaxy. "The dragons have solved problems we have struggled with for millennia," he told the Vorthak Confederation Council during a galaxy-wide broadcast. "Sustainable energy, environmental restoration, even medical treatments for genetic disorders that have plagued our people for generations." The migration's completion marked a new era for all three species. As the space-traveling dragons prepared to return to their distant homes, they left behind permanent ambassadors who would maintain the new alliance. The spawning had been successful, with hundreds of new hatchlings born in the restored sacred pools. But the most significant change was in how the three species viewed themselves and each other. Humans had proven their value as mediators and bridge builders. The Vorthak had overcome ancient fears to embrace new partnerships, and the dragons had found allies who could help them preserve their culture while adapting to a changing galaxy. 5 years ago, this planet was just another mining colony, Yunbi reflected as she watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Dragon forms soared gracefully overhead while Vorthak and human children played together in the fields below. Now it's the center of the galaxy's first true interspecies civilization. Taemin nodded, his hand resting on Starweaver's neck. The young dragon had become not just a companion but a true friend, sharing thoughts and experiences in ways that made their bond deeper than anything possible between members of the same species. "We were warned not to go near the predator dragons," he said with a smile. "Instead, we found family." The colony had been transformed from a simple mining outpost into something unprecedented in galactic history. Research facilities where the three species collaborated on solving universal problems. Schools where children learned multiple forms of communication. Cultural centers where dragon art, Vorthak philosophy, and human creativity combined to create entirely new forms of expression. Other colonies throughout the galaxy began requesting their own dragon partnerships. The alliance that had started with 3 lost hatchlings grew into a galactic network of cooperation and understanding. "We receive applications for a partnership every day," Nayun reported during a staff meeting. "Human colonies, Vorthak settlements, even species we've never heard of who want to learn about our tri-species model." Years later, when historians wrote about the Great Alliance, they would trace its origins to a single moment when a human xenobiologist chose to ignore warnings and investigate distress signals from the Forbidden Mountains. That choice led to the rescue of 3 dragon hatchlings, which led to first contact, which led to understanding, which led to the most successful interspecies partnership in galactic history. But for Taemin, the real significance was much simpler. He had found proof that the universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to look beyond their fears. Standing on the observation deck of the colony's new cultural center, watching dragons soar through clouds painted gold by the setting sun, while Vorthak and human families shared evening meals in the gardens below, he reflected on how much had changed since that first telepathic contact with a frightened hatchling. The warnings had been wrong. The predator dragons weren't humanity's enemies. They were their greatest allies, partners in building a future where different species could work together to solve problems none could handle alone. Sometimes the greatest discoveries came not from following warnings, but from questioning why those warnings existed in the first place. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you could do was to let fear prevent you from extending a helping hand to someone in need. The hatchlings had refused to go because they recognized something in their human rescuers, that even the humans hadn't understood about themselves. They had seen past the surface differences to the deeper truth that all intelligent beings shared common hopes and dreams. In the end, that recognition had changed everything.